All right, today we're going to talk about quadratics, and we're going to talk about what happens if we have a GCF and we need a factor. So the number one thing that people forget to do is they forget to factor out a GCF, and that's what we need to do first in every single factoring problem, and it's the number one thing I see students forget. And then you need to talk about how many terms you have. All right, so in my class, I consider this a shortcut. So for now, I'm not going to use it in the video, okay? This is optional to me, and I'm not going to use it in my video. So I'm going to focus on 3 terms. So I'm going to go from step 1 down here to 3 terms. So let's get started. First thing, you have to look for a GCF here. So the biggest number that divides into 36, 48, and 16 is 4. And this has x squared, an x, and no x, so they have no x's in common. If I divide each of these things by 4, I have 9x squared plus 12x plus 4. Okay, so we've already pulled out the GCF. Now we want to focus on these 3 terms using the steps above. A is 9, B is 12, and C is 4. Remember, if I'm going too fast, you can always pause the video or rewind and rewatch. You want to find out what multiplies to give you A times C, and in our case that's 9 times 4, so 36, and then adds to give you B, which in our case is 12. Make sure that you fully fill out your chart so you know what numbers you're looking for and you're trying to figure out if they multiply and add. So I list out the things that give me 36. So 1 and 36, 2 and 18, 3 and 12, 4 and 9, and 6 and 6. Now I did that pretty quickly, but I don't expect you to do it that quickly. Okay, you can take the calculator and divide by each number until you get them all. These are all the factors that give me 36. 1 plus 36 is 37, and if I subtract, it's 35. I want 12. 2 and 18, when I add them, is 20, and when I subtract, I get 16, and I want 12. 3 and 12, when I add, is 15, and when I subtract, I get 9, and I want 12. 4 and 9, when I add them, is 13, and when I subtract, I get 5, and I want 12. But 6 and 6 is great, because they add to give you 12, and it multiplies to give you 36, so always double check that both numbers work in your chart. Once you have your 2 numbers, you're going to split your middle. Kaplowy. It's going to bust into 2 different terms. This 4, this GCF, is literally going to just float down the entire time. Just float it down the entire time. Do not mess with it. So we're going to bring down that first term, and we're going to bring down the last term. But our middle term splits into the 2 we found. So plus 6x plus 6x. Now you're going to continue to do the steps. Remember, 4 just floats. Just float it down. Look for the GCF in the first 2 terms, and in this case it's 3x. Factor out that GCF out of those 2 terms, and you'll get 3x plus 2. Look at the GCF in these 2 terms, and it's 2. Factor that out, and we have 3x plus 2. Now if you look at this and look at this, they have one big huge GCF in common. The big old thing in the parentheses, the 3x plus 2. So bring down your 4. Factor out that 3x plus 2, and remember, when you factor it out, it's gone, and then read this left to right, 3x plus 2. If you're real fancy and you want to look like a good mathematician, you could also write it this way, but you don't have to. Boom, done. Let's go on to number 2. Remember, if I'm going too fast, pause it, rewind it, rewatch it, do what you need to do to learn. On this one here, there's a GCF of x, so I'm going to factor that out. And then we have this left over. Now, I'm not using the shortcut in this video, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a 0x in for that missing term, because we're missing the x term. And I'm going to continue doing this the way I usually do. A in this case is 1, B is 0, and C is negative 9. And you want to set up your chart. What multiplies to give you A times C, which in our case is negative 9, and adds to give you B, which is 0 in our case. You only have 2 options that multiply to give you 9. A 1 and a 9, and a 3 and a 3. 1 plus 9 is 10, but 1 minus 9 is 8, so that's not going to work. 3 plus 3 is 6, but 3 minus 3 is 0. So if one of these is negatives, let's see if it works. Negative 3 times 3 is negative 9. Yay! Negative 3 plus 3 is 0. Woohoo! It does work. So these are our 2 numbers that we want to use. Bring down the x, you're not going to mess with him at all anymore. Take this middle and kaplowy, split it in 2. So bring this down, but that middle term is now going to be negative 3x plus 3x. Bring down this x. The GCF amongst these 2 terms is x. Factor it out, and we have x minus 3. The GCF amongst these two terms is 3. Factor it out and we have an x minus 3. Then if you look, there's a big, huge GCF between these two, the thing in the parentheses, which is the x minus 3. Bring this x down, factor out the x minus 3, imagine that it's gone, and read it left to right, what's left over, x plus 3. And that's it. I recommend going back and rewatching these problems and restudying these two problems because these are the more difficult type of factoring problems that students miss. Until next time, goodbye.